Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Ride Along Radio Show. I'm your host, George Holt.
I'm Gil Contreras, and got a special guest in the studio today, my dog, my canine, Rhonda. She's a drug detection canine, and so we've got something to do this afternoon, so she's actually in studio here with me. So if you see her little head pop up, that's who that is.
All right. Our other co-host, Kent, is actually on travel, so we are going to miss his insights this week. To reintroduce everyone to the show, the Ride Along Radio Show is basically aimed at addressing topics, subjects, and subject matter that impact both the police and the community. And we do that in a way that's forthright, direct, no punches pulled. And we're able to do that not just because of our collective experience as law enforcement officers, but also because we're no longer law enforcement officers. We're former retired law enforcement officers, and we can shoot it to you straight. We have no departmental agenda to follow. We're not running for office, and nobody's paying us to say anything different. So so we can shoot it to you straight. And that's what we plan on doing here today. If we say something that you like, say something that you don't like, something that you want to have input on, feel free to call in. You can reach us at 323-293-3375. You can also send us a live tweet at Ride Along Radio, or you can send us an email at ridealongradioshow@gmail.com. So we're going to kind of get started here today. Our topic today is the Tamir Rice shooting. But before we get into that meaty and current topic, we like to do a little segment we call News of the Day. Just recently, in fact, late last week, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, signed into law Senate Bill 707, which ends the exemption for carrying concealed weapons on campus. So as you all know, you can't carry a gun on campus, right, on whether it's a K through 12 school or a college campus or anything like that. Guns are barred. However, there are exemptions for law enforcement, for obvious reasons, and for concealed weapon permit holders. And concealed weapon permit holders have always enjoyed this exemption because they've had a certain degree of vetting and a certain degree of training. Well, in response to the shooting in Oregon last week at the, help me say that if I say it wrong, Umpqua College, Community College in Oregon.
That's all I understand.
Yeah, that's as close as we're going to get. As a result of that tragedy, there have been a lot of reactions, and in California, the neighboring state to the south, the reaction was to sign into law Senate Bill 707, which ends the exemption for concealed weapons permit holders. So now they can no longer carry guns on campus. They can no longer carry their weapons concealed on their person on campus, not legally at least, as they could before. And the idea behind this is that it reduces the amount of guns on campus and will therefore reduce the chance or the likelihood of a mass shooting occurring on a college. Personally, I think that's nonsense, and I'm really hoping that someone calls in with a opposing view, because really, honestly, in good faith, I really would like to hear the logic behind something like that. I'm really all ears.
Yeah, there's absolutely no logic to that position. And hope you give out the number again, because I know that there's that 47%, that pesky 47% that Mitt Romney talked about, and the little 5% of special interest groups that are just so afraid. Even the word gun, if you just say gun, they go, gun. There was a kid who was suspended from school because he chewed a sandwich into the shape of a gun. It's gotten ridiculous, and it's gotten even more ridiculous, during the last 7 years of, the current administration at the White House. But I hope someone can call and try to make an argument for Governor Brown's new law, because it makes absolutely no sense. Like most gun control laws, it will not stop one criminal from shooting another criminal. It won't stop one active shooter from going into a campus or a movie theater or anywhere else and doing a mass shooting. It's not going to affect anybody except law-abiding citizens, and that's what's the problem with this. This is another progressive, quote, feel-good, close quote, law that does absolutely nothing.
Well, see, and the thing is, and when you look at it, and again, we're all ears. Please call in 323-293-3375. We're all ears. I really would like to hear the other side of that, because from where I sit, from where Gil sits, and we talked about this off air, we're just not seeing it. I've actually put out calls to the California chapter of the Brady campaign to get some answers on this, and so far they've not acknowledged any of those requests. But it's really a good faith request to kind of find out, because based on the information we have available to us now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So much so that it appears to not really be the reason for that. The only thing that makes sense to me in my mind is that this is a way to tighten yet another loophole as we edge slowly and more completely toward gun control. You know, Sun Tzu said that if you want to boil a frog alive, you don't drop him in a pot of boiling water because he'll hop right out. You put him in a pot of cool water and you incrementally turn the water up, and before he knows it, he's boiled alive. And I think that's really what this, it appears to me by every metric that's what this is, because nobody can possibly think that if you pass a law telling a concealed weapons permit holder, someone who, by the way, has been vetted, someone who has to meet a standard of training, because those are not, you don't go down to Walmart and buy a concealed weapons permit.
Right.
Those are issued either by the chief of police, but usually by the county sheriff of the county you live in, and you've got to go through a background investigation. You've got to sometimes even have a psychological examination, and you also have to meet a training standard that is, in most counties, it's actually a fairly high training standard.
Well,
So-
you know, speaking of training, I did the gunfighter CCW course that your company puts on, and
That's a Solutions Group International, by the way. Go ahead.
and that was one. You know, I'm an NRA firearms instructor, and I went to your guys' class, and it was one of the best shooting classes I've ever taken. I mean, shooting and moving, reloading, combat reloads, shooting from a vehicle, engaging targets on the move. I mean, it was excellent. It was an excellent class. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but you know, it gave me a default position to fall back to. You know, if the stuff hits the fan, you know, you default to training. So whatever you're trained to do in a crisis situation, that's exactly what you do.
And not just you revert to training, you revert back to your basically where your lowest level is, where your baseline is.
That's
because
right.
when you come under stress and adrenaline kicks in, you're not going to be at your best. You're going to really be at your worst. So you have to train until your worst is very good.
Right, because your fine motor skills are impacted by the adrenaline
Heavily.
rush and that. Just though the training that's required and the training that's available today, there's 1,000 groups, no, not 1,000, but there's several groups like Solutions Group that offer this kind of training, and there are a lot of former military, retired law enforcement that are doing these classes for civilians. And you know, more and more, I'm encouraging everybody that I know to get a firearm, get a gun to protect themselves, but more than that, learn how to take care of it.
Exactly.
Learn how to shoot it, and learn how to store it. Part of the issue with the mass shootings is just the availability. You know, these guys of guns to crazy family members. There's no reason for if you have guns and you don't have a gun safe that your kids can't get into, you're just a fool.
You're wrong. Yeah, exactly. You're wrong if you do that. And we're going to cover that toward the end of the segment, end of today's show. We're going to loop back around and cover that in depth. But you know, this is one of those situations where I think the fact that we've asked for information to someone to actually come out and support this. And not in a debate format necessarily, but just in a way that we can talk and have a respectful and open conversation where we can discuss the pros and the cons of this. It just it doesn't make sense to me. Now, I am admittedly and decidedly pro-gun. I am. And I know that makes me biased. But I'm also open-minded enough to know that because of that bias, I need to get the other side of the coin. And I've really been trying to do that. And thus far, no one's stepped up to explain. And I've asked on social media. I've asked via direct inquiry, email, and we're putting it out right now. And I really want to know what sense this makes, because it appears to make no sense at all to me.
That just kind of stuns me a bit. That usually the anti-gun group is pretty vocal, and they support any measure, whether it even makes sense or not.
And they did support this, even though it doesn't appear to make sense. They did. I just want to hear an articulable position, a reasonable position. Any position on how this makes sense, and I'm just not. Yeah. Thus far, nothing.
And part of that, I think, because I asked my own sister, who's if you looked up in a dictionary, flaming, progressive, liberal, afraid of guns in the dictionary, her photo would be there because that's who she is. I even asked her, just come on and just tell us why this is good.
Right.
Try to give us an idea, and she wouldn't do it. She didn't want to do it.
And she's not a member of the anti-gun lobby, then I wouldn't necessarily expect her to have all the talking points.
She knows the talking points. And, but there's a bit of hypocrisy also because she lives in this, quaint little city, and there's not much crime there, at least in the part where they live. And, they're all, anti-gun and pro, propositions like 47, 36, 215 until it comes to their door. And once they're the victims of a crime, then they go, "Oh wow,
that's a wake up call.
Maybe we should have been a little bit more prepared for that."
Right. That's a wake up call. Is what that is for most people, and it's unfortunate. And I'm not saying that everybody has to think the way that I think or that Gil thinks, and that's fine. But I do ask that you have a realistic viewpoint and that you can base it on something tangible, something articulable. Because again, I just been kind of waiting, and again, that's Senate Bill 707. So. For all of you out there who are concealed weapons permit holders, you will no longer be allowed to carry your weapons onto any school campus, from K through 12, community college, universities, et cetera. And people will say, well, why would somebody need to? And I know people are thinking, why would somebody need to carry a gun on a college campus? Well, if you weren't watching the news and you didn't hear me attempt to pronounce the name of that school in Oregon earlier, pay attention, because active shooter, mass shooter, spree killers, whatever you want to call them, that happens everywhere, and it's been happening on the college level a lot more recently. Not just Sandy Hook in the elementary school. None of those students are going to be armed. But in a college level, you have people who are old enough to have concealable firearms and who want to be able to carry them. And it may not even be that they're worried about a threat at school per se, but maybe they pass through an area to get to the school. Maybe the areas in the schools in an area like USC, that's not all that safe in the surrounding area. It's better than it was, but the University of Southern California is not in the best neighborhood. So you may have people who want to protect themselves from that. Maybe the person's coming from work and they have to lock up at their job or they have to go to work directly after they leave school. So they want the ability to have their firearms with them at all times. And really, I say if you got a gun and you can carry it legally, you should carry it all the time anyway, just because you never know what's going to happen.
Right. And if you think about the poor students, this just killed me. And there's only one presidential candidate that I even heard talk about it, and that was Dr. Ben Carson. And that is, I can't imagine a classroom where the shooter has walked in, shot people, and then tells everybody to just stand up, line up, and like a bunch of sheep, they all do. And then he walks person to person and asks them if they're Christian. And if they are, he shoots them in the head and he walks on. If they say no or they don't answer, he moves on. I can't imagine just standing, like, if I'm down the line.
Right, exactly.
And well, shoot, he's coming out.
You're waiting for that to happen?
I'm number 7. What am I going to do?
Right.
When you walk up, look, let me tell you something. If you put a gun in my face, I'm going to grab it. I'm just going to, I'm going to take it away from you. But you're going to do something.
But people are stunned, especially after the first person is shot. You have to assume that people are shocked that this is actually happening in real life.
Right.
And people aren't trained to react. They're not expecting that sort of thing. With our backgrounds, we're trained and prepared to accept that this is reality happening in front of us and then do something about it.
We expect anything could go wrong anytime, anywhere.
Exactly.
Like right now, something could happen and you might have to shoot or might deploy my dog. I don't know, but we're both ready for that.
We're ready, exactly.
And that's why training for civilians is so important, because when it hits the fan, you're not going to rise to your highest level of expectation, but you will respond with your lowest level of training. And if you haven't been trained to do anything, you will do absolutely nothing.
Like the people in Oregon. So we've got a caller. Right. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
This is Tanya, and I'm calling from L.A. I just have a general question. Do you guys think that if they installed metal detectors at the entrances on these campuses, will that stop some of the campus shooting? And I'll take the answer off air.
Okay. Thanks for calling. I believe that it would have some impact, and it would have a positive impact. And we've been seeing this actually at some campuses. That's actually not a new thing. At some school campuses in Los Angeles, there are metal detectors. However, if you're intent on doing this and you've planned it out, the school would have to be secured 24/7 to make sure that you weren't able to come in and secure or secrete weapons someplace on campus in your locker and then come back and get it. And if you think about the fact that a lot of schools are open on the weekends for activities, they're open at night for adult school, it's really not that hard to do that. But yes, to answer your question, I think it certainly would help. People may not like the optics of that. That kids going to school have to pass through metal detectors if they're going to get on an airplane. But that's To answer your question, yes, I think it would help. I just don't know if we're ready for that widespread.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree a bit with that because I think metal detectors, especially at a college campus, it would just be useless. They're too big. You need them in too many places.
Well, it's a porous environment.
Yeah,
for sure.
it wouldn't be cost effective, and it wouldn't stop an active shooter. The metal detectors are fine at a high school or a middle school even. As kids filter in through, get dropped off and filter in through kind of one or two gates, that makes sense to me, and it should be done, and that's where you find people with guns in the backpack or knives or stuff like that. But if you're talking about a college campus or a community college campus with so many entrances, installing the cost of installing metal detectors,
right, that's the other thing,
just wouldn't deter an active shooter because he's going to bring his guns in a bag in a car. He's going to have it on his body. He's going to dress. He's going to walk in, and even if you hear the metal detector, if the metal detector makes a sound, nobody's going to move. Nobody's going to do anything. People are going to say, "Hey,"
until they hear the gunshots, and then it's already started.
Is that a metal detector, or is that the?
So
it's like car alarms. You hear a car alarm, most people don't even look for
respond anymore. Yeah, exactly. Hey, so we're going to take a break. Again, Tanya, thanks for the call. Hope we answered your question. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, and welcome back to the Ride Along Radio Show here on the Morris Media Network. Again, you can call in at 323-293-3375. We take questions on Twitter at Ride Along Radio, in the chat room at morrismedialive.com, or you can send us an email at ridealongradioshow@gmail.com. So we answered Tanya's question prior to the break, and actually have another question, actually another couple of questions. So Hope asked, should there be drills for active shooter incidents at schools and places of work like we do for earthquakes, fires, etc.? And I think that's a very good question. Thank you, Hope. And a lot of places are doing that, actually. Mm-hmm. There's training that you're now seeing being offered, usually put together by police departments in local jurisdictions, where they actually are going out and saying, in the event that this happens, here's what you do. It involves everything from shelter in place, duck and cover, marshaling areas for people to assemble. And that's a good thing in that it does help get people out of the targeted zone. But here's the challenge with that, or the flip side, so to speak, is that usually your active shooter in a place like a school, workplace, church, or whatever, is typically someone who's familiar with the environment. It's typically someone who works there or used to work there, is a student there, like we've seen with some of these school shootings. And so what does that mean? That means that they're getting that same training along with everybody else, because we never know who's going to snap. We never know who's going to flip and start decide they want to come in and shoot up a bunch of people one day.
We might know.
No, we might know. That's true. I can't say we will never know.
Might be some indicators.
Because typically after it happens, nobody says, I can't believe that guy did it.
Right.
Most people say, oh, yeah, if it was going to be anybody, it was going to be him.
Or they say, I can't believe it happened here. And
that's what they'll say, right.
That kind of apathy is what leads to civilian deaths.
But, again, that person comes from the population that you're training. So that means that they understand what's going to happen when they come in shooting. They understand that people are going to run this way, or they're going to be sheltered here, or they're going to be marshaled in an open area there. So that's unfortunate, because it's kind of like you're letting the opposition look at your playbook, but it's better than nothing, because sometimes, especially in cases of terrorism, example, the LAX shooting on November 1st, 2013, that shooter was not from within the population. He just showed up and decided he was going to shoot the airport. Right. The flip side of that, though, is that the passengers aren't there to get that training either. So you have a shooter who is not an indigenous member of that community, but you also have most of the people in that building are transient, and that they're moving through that building. So they wouldn't benefit from any training anyway. It would just be the employees at the airport.
Right. And I think it's the Houston Police Department put out a video, and it's gone mainstream now. I think DHS has a version of it, but it's called Run, Hide, Fight. And that, that's part of it. If you can get away when the shooting starts, run, you get out. Number two, if you can't get out of where you are, but you still hear the shooting and it's getting close to you, then you hide. And then the third component is the fight component. And to me, that's probably one of the most important components is if you have to improvise weapons, what do you have? That you can use as a weapon. And anything.
Well, you won't have a concealed weapon if it's in California.
Well, no, but if you don't have a gun, then you have you have pens, you have clocks, you have
chairs,
whatever you have. And when I used to teach at a vocational college, I used to run my students through drills, and within a minute we could have that classroom darked out, the front door secure, and people in place who are already pre-selected to address anybody coming in that door. And I use my biggest guys, I use my veterans, the people who are willing to fight, and then everybody else just hid. And that was our plan. But we practiced that, and these guys, my students, got it down to where within 60 seconds that classroom was secured, and we were ready for anything coming in that door.
And you have to do that because if you don't, you're remiss. Especially in this day and age, because honestly, that is almost as likely to happen as a major earthquake,
right?
Or maybe not as likely to happen as a fire, but certainly is likely to happen as a major earthquake. I mean, when's the last time we've had a major earthquake where there were a bunch of casualties in this country? Not very often, but we've had a couple of shootings since the last major earthquake, several shootings.
And I'll tell you this, I last year I did, or it was earlier this year, I did the LAFD CERT program for Community Emergency Response Team. And the firefighter who taught that, he was so adamant about, if you don't have food, water, medication, a way to protect yourself for at least 30 days, you're just a fool. You're kidding yourself. Because in the event of a major earthquake, there's not going to be a 911. There will be no police. There'll be no emergency medical. So if you don't have the emergency medical training, if you don't have a first aid CPR card, if you don't have a way to protect yourself, if you don't have food, water, to sustain yourself for at least 30 days. And if you have a dog or any other pet, do they have extra food? If you have elderly people in your home, do they have medication? Do you have? I have 6 months of stuff prepared. So
that's people are so used to relying on the government for everything, and to a certain extent, there's certain things you have to rely on the government for. But this is not one of them. Emergency preparedness is an individual responsibility for sure.
Because when there's no police, the predators are going to come out. They're going to come out.
We've seen that before,
and they're going to start taking stuff.
Okay, so I hope we answered your question. I think she actually had another question, which was, are we advocating a Wild West mentality in terms of allowing people?
Can I get some background music on this? Can I get some background music on this one?
Yeah, Wild West mentality. This would be a good answer. So, and I'm assuming this is because we said that people should be allowed to carry their concealed weapons wherever they are, and they should be able to have them in schools and in any other place, right?
Well, I guess they don't have my favorite song ready. But anyway, when I describe to people when they ask me what was it like in the early 80s and the mid 80s and in the 90s in South Central Los Angeles. And,
there you go, on cue.
And this is what it was like. South Los Angeles was the Wild Wild West.
Yeah. Definitely.
The work that we did back in those days, this is what it felt like. And it was gang members with guns and cops with guns.
Yep.
And but to address the question, I'm not advocating Wild Wild West people should be walking down the street with a 6-shooter, that you can see. In fact, I don't even support open carry.
Not at all.
But I do say this. I suggest to anybody that I know that you should prepare yourself, get prepared for whatever's coming, prepare to protect yourself, and not only with guns, but you should be trained in unarmed defense. You should be trained in other weapons like knives. They can be just as deadly as quick as a gun.
Definitely.
If you look at what's happening in Jerusalem right now, you'll see that. And then the training. And we talk a lot about, the governor just signed a law. It's like, oh man, he signed a law, I can't carry my gun.
Right.
Oh man,
that's not going to impact the gangsters at all.
Look, here's what I say: if you have a gun and you have the training and you're prepared and you don't have it on you, you're a fool.
As we say, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
And if some prosecutor, liberal prosecutor, or some police administrator somewhere, or sheriff wants to make an example of your case, then better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6. I'll take my chances in a courtroom with the reasonableness of my actions, my background, and my training, and then see if they still want to prosecute me or not. Just because the law says, you can't carry a gun because the governor wrote his name on a piece of paper. Well, okay.
Well, we're not advocating anybody break any laws. But
I'm not advocating anybody breaking any laws, but I'm saying if you can't protect yourself when you're out in public, you're a fool.
And you have to ask yourself, guy comes into a place where you are and he's shooting and you have a gun and you're trained to carry the gun and you're licensed to carry a gun, but you can't carry it in that particular environment. When you're being cornered and those gunshots are getting closer and closer, I don't think you'll feel very good about your decision to have left your gun at home. So again, not advocating a wild, wild west mentality, although for certain people there is this wild, wild west mentality.
Yeah, criminals.
Yeah, exactly. So they're out there anyway.
Criminals CCW every day, everywhere they go.
Exactly, and they're not worried about that. So intern Darren brought up a news article that's relevant to this during our show today. So because California and Texas are like two different states in the same country, although they're two different states in the same country, but they seem like they're in different countries.
Yeah.
The University of Texas.
Europe. We're more like Europe.
Right, exactly. So the University of Texas has decided that they will allow people to carry concealed. In fact, I don't think that they ever decided that people couldn't carry concealed on the campuses. And there were some calls to ban that, and they decided they weren't going to ban it. So there are students walking around carrying guns legally because it's Texas and they can. And other students at University of Texas, Austin, UTA, decided that they would protest against that because they didn't want the guns on campus. They didn't feel safe knowing that other students were armed on campus. And they decided to hold a demonstration called Cocks, not Glocks. Yes, you heard that right. Cocks, not Glocks. And what they've done is...
Only college students.
And only in Austin. If it was going to be in Texas, I knew it was going to be in Austin. They've decided that they are going to walk around carrying dildos openly, like sticking out of their backpacks or whatever. And I guess the logic is that if that offends you, how can this offend you, but a gun won't offend you? Right. So they're making a statement there, and I get that, and that's cute.
Funny.
It's funny.
It's funny.
It makes a point, and I laughed when Darren came in and said that. Yeah. So there's a little pushback there, but honestly, you have the right to carry that gun, and you are legally entitled to carry that gun. The guy can legally carry a dildo too, I guess, right? So it goes both ways.
That's right.
And
when the shooter walks into the classroom and starts shooting at people, we'll see who's going to take action. The cock or the Glock.
Yeah, exactly right. I think we already know the answer to that. Again, so if you want to call in, it's 323-293-3375. I am George Holt. This is Gil Contreras. We're both police veterans, and we're going to be moving on with the next portion of the Ride Along Radio Show. So, actually, you had another news story.
Well, I just wanted to comment very quickly. There's a couple of things, and a couple of weeks ago we had the president of the Long Beach Police Officers Association on. He was kind enough to come on as a guest. And I was looking at their website this morning, and they posted a couple of stories that were of interest to me. And one was the mayor of Chicago, who's a former Clinton or Obama administration, Rahm Emanuel. He's now the mayor over there. And, there's a story out there about how he is now blaming the police officers themselves for the increase in crime in his city.
Right, they've gone fetal, in his words.
Yeah, so I thought that was of interest. And then, but even more interest to me was the story on in the Washington Post about Prop 47 here in California, which decriminalized a bunch of dope offenses and raised the bar for theft. And I just want to read you this little part here. Apparently, this occurred in Palm Springs. A gang member was caught with a stolen gun, and because the gun's value was only $625, which didn't meet the $950 threshold, the officer, instead of arresting that gang member, confiscating the gun, and putting him in jail, wrote him a citation and released him. And the gang member, here's what the gang member said to the cop. He said, "But I had a gun. What is wrong with this country?" Even the gang member knows that these laws are ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're not saving money. And in fact, they're causing the same criminals to cycle through. Officers are now dealing with the same criminals for the same crimes almost every day. In fact, the police officers now call them Prop 47 frequent flyers.
Well, that was introduced. And even though it's a California issue, it is only a California issue right now because, again, as we've been saying, in terms of criminal justice, in terms of policing trends, in terms of social trends, as California goes, so goes the nation. We're the most populous nation, and we're the richest nation. We're the most populous state in the nation. We're the richest state in the nation, and we're probably, if not the most influential, definitely one of the most influential states in the country. So we see things start here, and they tend to move eastbound across the country.
But I will add, though, that as California moves further and further to the political left, we're becoming this unrecognizable socialist place. And God, I just hope the rest of the country doesn't follow that lead.
Well, and see what happens is you'll see it, and it's so funny that there's other places that decided to legalize marijuana first, like Colorado was first in that. And I really thought that you would see that complete wiping out of marijuana laws happen here first, although they've been loosened quite a bit. But California, again, leads the way on this. So it was sold, though, as a way to reduce prison overcrowding. It was sold as, well, people are getting out who are committing more serious offenses. They're getting out earlier to relieve overcrowding because all these petty criminals are coming in and kind of backing up the prison system. So that's how it was sold.
Well, and because of the progressive politics, we're now calling some drug offenses, we're calling them nonviolent drug offenses.
Right.
And if you go see the movie Sicario, I'm going to tell you, you'll realize very quickly that there's no such thing as a nonviolent drug offense. If you're using illegal drugs, violence was used against someone, somewhere, in order for you to use that
right,
drug.
Either produce it or transport it or something. Yeah, definitely.
And that money that you use to buy dope, every time you smoke a joint, every time one of your friends lights up a joint on a Friday night and you and listen to music, yeah, that money is fueling the drug cartels in Mexico. Right. That is corrupting the Mexican government. The Mexican government can no longer protect its own people from the cartels.
And
because of that,
sure.
We have a refugee problem at our southern border, the way we're seeing in Europe with Syria.
And there are people who would say this is why we need to legalize all drugs. This is why we need to take it from the hands of the criminals. But that's a topic for another show, because we could spend all day talking about that one, and I bet you the phone boards would light up then. So maybe we will have that for a future topic.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so on to our, and again, if you want to call in, 323-293-3375, you can tweet us at Right Along Radio, send an email, rightalongradioshow@gmail.com. The topic of today is the Tamir Rice shooting, and we're addressing this now because the final report has been issued, and it shows, or it has arrived at the conclusion that the shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice by Cleveland, Ohio police was reasonable. And on its face, a lot of people recoil from that, and they say, well, how is that possible? How could it be reasonable? And for those of you who are not familiar with that, this is a situation where a call came into Cleveland PD that, Rhonda, take it easy. There was a call that came into Cleveland PD back in November 22nd of 2014, and essentially the caller said that there was a person walking around waving a gun, and the person says, I think it might be a toy gun, or I think it might be fake, I think is what they said.
Right.
And this is what they said to the police dispatcher when they called 911. Well, there's a lot of things that happened after that, and I'm going to kind of jump around in the telling of the story to help navigate why people feel a certain way and then what came out later that kind of led to them saying it was reasonable. So the officers show up on the scene. They confront the subject, 12-year-old Tamir Rice, who does have what turns out to be a BB gun in his waistband, or a pellet gun. The video shows that he appears to reach for that gun as they exit the car, and one of the officers shoots him right there on the scene. I don't believe he died until the next day, right? Or he died later that day.
I think it was later that day.
And so people look at that and go, well, how could a 12-year-old be killed by the police for having a pellet gun? It does not help the situation and the community perception that Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old African-American boy, and the officer that shot him, Timothy Loman, I believe is his name, was a white man, or is still a white man. So that's those things kicked up a bunch of community outrage. People wanted answers, and now the answers appear to be here, and people aren't happy about those answers. But I told you I was going to tell the story kind of out of order to give you some perspective on that. The person who called in said that there's someone out here waving a gun. I think it's a toy gun. I think it might be fake.
Yeah, I think fake was the word.
Fake. But that information was given to the 911 dispatcher. The dispatcher did not relay that information to the officers. And there's a couple of reasons why that might have been. But the officers were never told that this is likely a fake gun. Had they been told that, might they have responded differently? They might have taken into account. They should have taken into account for sure. but that wasn't relayed to them. And so they got out, and all they know is, hey, I've been told there's a man with a gun. They pull up, they get out, and a shooting ensues. First, let me say, before we get into the sides of this thing, that this was a tragedy. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure that there's no one who wishes that this hadn't happened more than that officer, besides Tamir Rice's family, of course. I'm sure that officer has relived this in his mind over and over again and wishes something had been different that day. He probably wishes he hadn't even come to work that day. He probably wishes he hadn't even got the job at this point, because that's a tragic thing to have shot a 12-year-old. 12-year-old dies, and now you find out later after you've shot the person and they've died that it was a 12-year-old who couldn't really have harmed you because they had a pellet gun. Right. So there's nobody who thinks this is a good thing. We talk about police shootings and we say that was a good shooting, that was a bad shooting. This is one of those things where technically, illegally, it was a good shooting, but in terms of how it all panned out, it was a bad shooting. And it was a bad shooting, but it was good legally. So it's one of those really dicey things. So
by good, you kind of, in quotes,
in policy, justified in
right.
policy. So there's really no such thing as a good shooting.
Right.
But we say good shoot, bad shoot versus whether it was in policy, whether it was in the law. And this was deemed to have been reasonable based on things like the use of force continuum, based on what the officer knew at the time when they decided to make that decision. Right. And it's not something people want to hear. But I have to say that having reviewed the information that's been made available to us now, I can understand why they would arrive at that conclusion. It doesn't mean that something different didn't need to happen, and we'll talk about what we think the differences should have occurred there. But anybody who's up on this case or well-versed in this or understands what's going on, again, we'd love to take your calls or tweets, 323-293-3375, or you can tweet us at Ride Along Radio.
If you go on YouTube and just type in Tamir Rice, the video will immediately pop up, and you'll be able to see the surveillance video from a
across the
security
street,
camera
park,
across the street.
Right.
So distances are you can't really tell distances, and I don't know that I don't know from what I know of the case. I don't know that Tamir Rice actually grabbed the gun when the officers were present or went for it as he saw them. I don't know that, but I do know that if you're confronted by someone, even if the dispatchers had told the police officers it might be fake, in my mind, I don't really care about that because I don't know. I don't know whoever said that. I don't know what their training is, what their level of experience is. And just because they think it's fake doesn't mean that it is.
Right, so because anybody could call in and say that. Okay, so speaking of people calling in, we do have a caller. A hello, caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Terrell from Chicago.
Terrell from Chicago. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I just wanted to know. I hear what you guys saying, but once he got shot, he was still alive. Why did they try to let him bleed out? Why did the officer just sit there on the hood of the car just watching? Why didn't they try to help him?
You know what, Terrell?
It seems like that happens a lot.
Terrell, that's an excellent question.
Or whatever, and the police just sit there and watch as they bleed out or they die.
You know, Terrell,
you guys be trying to get an ambulance or something.
Evie, I got you one better than that, Terrell. I can answer you better than that. Not just an ambulance, but you're starting to see more and more officers trained to render that. Everybody's trained to render first aid, but more and more officers are trained to render beyond basic life-saving things and have equipment in their cars that can stop bleeding from gunshots, et cetera, et cetera. So in this situation, I agree with you. Something more should have been done. Let me say this. Cleveland Police Department has been under fire for some time by the federal government for the lack of training provided to their police officers. I'm not saying that had it happened outside Cleveland, it would have been different. But certainly, it's a valid question to ask why, after the person's been shot, why don't we take steps, especially now that the scene is secure. Sometimes there's a bunch of stuff going on, like the North Hollywood bank robbery out here in 1997. There were still bullets flying, and one of the suspects bled out because they wouldn't let the paramedics get in close enough to deal with him. We saw that at the LAX shooting on November 1st, 2013. That we have a situation where it's not safe for the paramedics to come in. The officers need to neutralize the threat. This was not a situation like that. And I agree with you 100% that the thing to do in a situation like that is to try to save that person's life, because we don't shoot to kill, we shoot to stop. Now, it just happened, and I'm also answering your question I just got on Twitter from Ton Teasy. Why didn't the cop aim for his leg? We're trained to stop someone from hurting us or hurting someone else. And the standard is immediate defensive life. And so when shooting him in the leg would not have stopped him had he been somebody who had a real gun. Shooting him in the leg wouldn't have stopped him from drawing that gun and shooting the officer, shooting someone else. We don't train for that. We train for what's going to stop that person and incapacitate them. Now, does death result from that a lot of times? Yes, that's why it's called deadly force. But we're not trained to shoot for the leg. Also, leg's a lot harder to hit than center mass, too.
I mean, if you're shooting for an arm, people who don't know guns will say, well, why didn't they just shoot him in the arm or shoot
the gun out of his hand or something?
It's such a smaller target. That's why this is what you shoot for. It's center mass. That's what you shoot for, from the waistband up to the neck, because it's easier to hit under stress while the adrenaline is flowing and your suspect is moving and you're moving. And
it'll do something. It'll actually incapacitate that, much more likely incapacitate that person than being shot in the leg.
Right. But I do want to say this to Terrell. I don't know why, I don't know what the policy is of the police department with regard to rendering first aid to someone that you just shot. And I want to find that out because I had the same question. But I want to take it a step further than what George was talking about. Today, what we learned from watching the military in Afghanistan and Iraq is that you have to be able to stop the bleeding from gunshot wounds immediately. So each soldier in combat has their own personal first aid kit
called an IFAC, individual first aid kit.
Correct, and they carry them right. And most police officers are doing this also now.
Right.
And if you're out there and you don't have one on you, even as a civilian, anywhere you go, if you're a victim in an active shooter, you want to be able to take care of yourself and take care of somebody that's with you.
Traffic accident. You're much more likely to be hurt in a traffic accident. You should be able to deal with that too. But the IFACs that the soldiers carry, the trauma kits that police officers carry, those are for treating themselves when they get hurt.
Or your partner.
Or your partner, right. But your partner's got one and you're going to use his on him.
Right,
or her.
But on the same track, the shooting at the airport where you worked, I wondered why did it take so long to get the TSA agent out of there and not get him to medics, and did any officer render first aid to the TSA agent as he was laying there bleeding also, because you had a bleeding suspect who was shot and you had a bleeding TSA agent.
They erroneously believed that the TSA agent was dead, and he wasn't yet, unfortunately. I just got another tweet in from Tantizi. You know what? The tweet was, sorry, don't know about guns. But we still welcome the question. It's a question that gets asked a lot.
Right.
And I'm glad that we had a chance to clear that up for you and for anyone else who may have still had that same question and didn't want to ask or hasn't asked yet.
Right.
So thanks for the tweet.
Because I think, more and more, as citizens, we should be saying to our police administrators, hey, what's the policy on this? I understand we have a use of deadly force policy, and there's under certain conditions they can use deadly force. Fine. Once they shoot somebody and you realize your victim is a 12-year-old,
right?
What's the policy then? There's got to be some policy about what to do.
Even if it's not a 12-year-old, even if it's a 35-year-old man who did have a gun and was going to shoot you, I still think we're going to see a movement toward rendering aid to that person and to stop that person from bleeding out if you possibly can. And honestly, it's just the right thing to do. It seems counterintuitive. Someone tries to kill you, you shoot them, and now you're going to save their life. But that's just the right thing to do. I believe that it is.
I agree.
Especially in a situation like this where you have a shooting and I'm sure that those officers found out after the subject was shot that this is a kid and that's not a real gun. And that's a bad thing. But let's talk about an acronym really quickly we use in law enforcement. And Gil and I are both use of force instructors. We're both police firearms instructors, so we bring a level of expertise to this. The acronym is IDOL, like American Idol, IDOL. It stands for Immediate Defensive Life. So that means that an officer can shoot someone or use deadly force, rather, because it doesn't always involve a gun. Usually it does. But immediate defensive life, whether it's that officer's life, officer's partner's life, civilian's life, or anybody's life, human life, immediate defensive life. So when that officer pulled up and got out, and the subject was standing there, right by the car door, basically, the gun is in his waistband. The subject's hands start moving toward. I don't know if he actually put his hands on it or not, but apparently the video shows his hands moving toward the center of his body where the gun was. The officer not really having much of a choice and armed only with the facts that he had then. And keep in mind, officers can only act on facts known to them at that time. Okay, and that cuts both ways, and I'll explain why I say that in a second. That officer felt that I'm going to be shot. This person's been walking around waving a gun. and that officer drew his gun and he shot the subject. Unfortunately, again, as we know now, this is a 12-year-old with a pellet gun. We say, well, how come the dispatcher didn't pass that information on? The dispatcher really is not, the dispatcher doesn't know the person that called in either.
Right.
So the dispatch, and also let me say this, yes, it was a pellet gun or an airsoft gun, but the orange safety tip had been removed. So even though the officer didn't get a chance to see the orange safety device on there to let you know it's not a real gun, because it was down in his waistband, the person who called in was saying that, but they weren't able to fully articulate that, yeah, it's a toy. Because if they had seen that, they probably wouldn't have even called, you know? Or they would have called it with a different language maybe they would have used.
Right.
So after the officer shoots him, he goes down, and then unfortunately the aftermath was that he bled out. I guess his sister showed up on the scene. She's distraught, and she ends up being restrained.
She actually got arrested for one.
She got arrested. Right. And I don't think they charged her with that. I would certainly hope that they drop the charges on that, or not press charges, because quite naturally she's distraught that her 12-year-old brother's just been shot and is dying right there in front of her. But, one of the things we talked about is things that could have been done differently. And this is just based on our experience. And it kind of I'm hesitant to Monday morning quarterback these officers. But the approach to that maybe should have been a little different. And out here in L.A., we use a term called precipitation when we review a use of force. We say, did the officer do anything? Did the officer's actions, the decisions the officer make the shooting more likely to occur than not occur? Did they do anything to precipitate the shooting? And looking at how they pulled up directly on the subject instead of having some space. Again, the park was empty. It was there was nobody else on the video footage
because it was snowing out.
It was snowing out, right? So they actually should have stopped a little farther back, had some cover, as opposed to getting out. You open the door and the guy's right there in your face with a gun. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
So I mean, there was things that they did that were not done by the book. They were against best practices. Remember earlier I said that the Department of Justice has criticized the Cleveland Police Department for their level of training, and even in the report said their level of training is so low that this is going to result in danger to the public. And this is what we had. So I look at it as it was like a perfect storm of bad things that lined up, and it was just as tragic and almost as unavoidable as this kid having been hit by lightning.
Right.
It wasn't that the officer had any ill intent. It wasn't the officer knew it was a 12-year-old with a pellet gun. The officer pulls up. He's got a call that there's a person with a gun. His partner officer, because this is a trainee, I might understand, right? A new officer. His training officer pulls the car right up to where he's right in front of the subject, and that officer opens the door and gets out. He's confronted with the situation. That officer's got to act, and that officer doesn't have a whole year to look at that and make a decision. The officer's got to decide like that, and that's what happened.
And it may be politically incorrect to Monday morning quarterback officers by other officers, but there's some cases where you can just look at it, and if you're an experienced officer and you look at it in a trainer, you just go, wow, that was really bad tactics.
Right.
And that tactic probably contributed greatly to that OIS. And
OIS is officer-involved shooting. So when we say OIS, we mean officer shooting someone.
And so in this case, in the Tamir Rice shooting, those bad tactics of the driver officer who was supposed to be the, quote, senior officer.
The training officer, yeah.
Pulling the car up like that put his rookie partner in a position where he almost had no other option but to fire. The question is, does that mean these guys should be prosecuted?
Right, that's the big question.
And based on everything that I know and I've seen, I think they should both be fired. The one guy for being on probation and the senior officer for employing such poor tactics. But prosecuted for manslaughter, I don't know about
it doesn't rise to the level of criminal prosecution because there was no bad intent on that officer's part. The officer was going about his duties as he should have, responding to a radio call. This wasn't something that the officer even generated. The officer didn't profile Tamir Rice and say, I'm going to go stop that person. So it wasn't even a legal stop or anything that came out of this. It was a citizen calling in about someone walking around waving a gun in the park. They think it's a fake, but and I'm not even going to try to hold a 12-year-old accountable for playing with a pellet gun. I mean, that's just something that happens. Actually, when I was probably
it's fair to say where's the parents and why is this kid walking around with an airsoft gun that looks like a real gun?
Who got him the gun? Yeah, and I never let my kids have toy guns, but that's because I had real guns in my house. and I never wanted there to be any confusion.
Right.
But, I had an instance like that when I was about 9 years old. My father bought me a really nice pellet gun. It looked like a real gun, about the size of a shotgun held by a 9-year-old. Myself and my friend, my childhood friend Pierce Melton, were shooting out flowers in the neighborhood trees. One of the neighbors called. I'm in the backyard with Pierce, 2 LAPD officers coming to the backyard, and they see me standing there holding what looks like a real shotgun. Now, fortunately, my neighbor, when he called, and I know what he said because he was a neighborhood snitch, he said, there's a kid, there's kids out here shooting flowers out of my trees with a pellet gun. So he had seen us shooting. He knew that it was a pellet gun. He relayed that. He was very clear about that, apparently. And when they came around the corner, there wasn't even any guns drawn. Mm-hmm. It was, hey, kids, and they took the gun, gave it to my grandmother, and then my father had to hear about it from my mother for giving me the gun in the first place. Right. But I don't want anybody to try to blame the victim in this, and the kid really is the victim in this because he wasn't out there robbing people or doing anything like that, and I don't want people to try to dirty him up.
Well, we don't know what he was doing. We don't know why he was out there.
But brandishing. He was walking around in circles.
But we don't know why he was brandishing that thing out there like that.
Right, but there was no calls, no accusations that he.
Well, there was a call. That's what got the
No, I mean there was no calls that he had been robbing people or that anything felonious had occurred.
Right.
So when we look at this, based on the facts that have come out, based on the information the officers had at the time, because again, you can only act on what you know at the time, and you can only hold those officers accountable for what they knew at the time. At the time, they didn't know, and what else were they going to do?
Right, and I just think that this is something that I see in kind of some of the OISs that have occurred over the last year that are kind of controversial, and I think it's time for police officers to slow down, for God's sakes. Breathe, slow down. Why? If you watch the Tamir Rice video, the officer jams right in. I mean, he heard the call of a possible man with a gun. He raced over there, rushed right up to it. Slow the freak down
Get some
and
space.
Do your job.
Get some space. Take
Use
cover.
Tactics, for God's sake.
So in terms of them being held accountable, this is certainly going to be a multi-million-dollar lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
And settlement because they did use bad tactics. And as far as them allowing him to bleed out there's that duty of care that perhaps wasn't met. So they were definitely there were things they could have done, but it doesn't rise to the level of criminal malfeasance. Right. You're not going to be able to put somebody in jail for something like this. They did their job poorly, but they didn't do it in a criminal manner.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're running into the tail end here, and one of the things we do, and again, please call in 323-293-3375. You can tweet us at Right Along Radio. One of the things we do is a closing segment called What You Should Know. And our tip of the week, and Gil kind of touched on it earlier, is gun ownership. They say that for every 100 Americans, there are 90 guns. Now, this doesn't mean that 90 out of 100 Americans own one gun in each household.
Right.
It just means that there are some households that have no guns, and there are some households like mine that have, shall we say, several guns. And so it balances out. Multiple guns, multiple firearms, and it balances out to the statistic that for every 100 Americans, there's 90 firearms. But gun ownership is a huge responsibility. It's not like you're just getting a fishing rod or you're getting, a jet ski or something. This is something that has the ability to take a human life. It has the ability, and unfortunately, the likelihood, it's more likely if you don't store your guns properly that someone in your own home will fall victim to that gun being misused. So lock up your guns. And in many states, especially in California, criminal storage of a firearm is a felony offense. If a minor gets their hands on a firearm that was in your home, and they hurt themselves, they hurt somebody else, even if they hurt you with it, you are going to be held liable. And by minor, it used to be 14 years old, but they just strengthened the law to say 17 or younger. The person 17 or younger, they get their hands on a gun, they hurt somebody, you're the one that's going to go to prison for that. I have extended family members who experienced this, where one of the children got a hold of a gun that was in the household and shot one of the siblings, and the family was just destroyed with the parents being taken away and the children being taken out of the home, and it's just a very tragic situation. When you buy a gun, at least when you buy a gun in California, they give you a firearm safety device. Use the firearm safety device to lock that gun up. If you want to keep your gun at the ready, you can spend a little bit more money on a decent safe or a lockbox, or you can keep the gun loaded, but you keep it secured so that nobody can get into it, I mean, it's a huge responsibility.
It is, and if you have guns and you don't have a safe, you're just a fool, and you're an accident waiting to happen. You're walking liability.
That's one of the main things that's stolen out of your house in a burglary too, is unsecured firearms. Those guns end up on the street and they hurt innocent people. They're used in robberies, gang violence, violence against police officers. They're you know, when we catch criminals, typically they're carrying guns that were stolen out of somebody's house.
So if you put it between the mattresses or in the closet or
in your sock drawer,
yeah, the kids know where you have it. Even if you say, well, they don't know where I put it. Yeah, they do. And when you're not home, they go and they look at it. They know where it is.
Exactly. And you know how many kids play with guns and screw around and you know, fortunately most of them don't end up hurting each other with them, but when they do, it's an awful tragedy. So you know, that's our tip of the week. So in terms of social media info, you can like us on Facebook. I always get this messed up between like and follow, where we what we like and what we follow. But you can like us on Facebook, the Ride Along Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram at Ride Along Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Ride Along Radio, or you can send us an email at ridealongradioshow@gmail.com. Another thing we'd like to do is extend an invitation to everybody to email us with topics that you'd like to see discussed on the show. Remember, we try to stay within that bandwidth of issues that affect both the community and the police, so that we can kind of provide some input on that from an informed perspective. Also, later on, this will be uploaded onto YouTube. Feel free to leave comments in the comment section there on YouTube. We actually got a couple in the last week that were pretty good. We got a good chuckle out of those, but sometimes they can be very informative too. So if you have any suggestions for the show, feel free to email us, or you can post it up on on YouTube, and also a podcast will be available later on, probably in the next day or so. So with that, I'm George Holt.
Gil Contreras.
We have a special guest, Rhonda. I want to thank intern Darren for his help here today, and our executive producer, the poetess, and thank you, Miss Danielle, for all your helpfulness here. We will be back next Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we're on for an hour right here on MorrisMediaLive.com. See you then.
Good.